Batman Ego, Bruce Wayne is confronted by a hallucination of himself, which is seen as the id. And the id comes from Freudian's tripartite model of the psyche that is characterized by the id, the ego, and the superego. So here we see Batman's id, and it believes that Bruce Wayne is actually the mask, while Batman is the true self. But outside of what is conventionally known about Batman and his pursuit for justice, the id believes that Batman is actually created from a need for revenge, from fear, from rage, and actually not justice. And what is interesting to me is the level of Stoic examination that comes out of Batman's interaction with this hallucination, the id. And of course, he does start to engage with the hallucination. And over time, he accepts what the hallucination is telling him. He accepts that his motivations upon examination is actually governed by his fear of losing the people that he loves, the fear of repeating his past, and the fear of also re traumatizing himself and the people around him. But mostly, he is also driven by guilt. Guilt is a huge leitmotif that surrounds the character of Batman. Batman, in all iterations, is riddled with guilt, and he is more than happy to accept the burden of guilt upon himself in any situation that may or may not actually connect to him directly. In the case of Batman Ego, he is riddled with guilt over the death of Buster Sibbs. Buster Sibbs unfortunately takes his own life in front of Batman because of his fear of the Joker. Not only does he take his own life, but he takes the lives of his entire family because of his fear of the Joker. So Batman feels guilty about the fact that he is not able to apprehend the Joker on time. And that is where the cycle of this leitmotif continues for Batman. But the interesting thing about him in this entire comic book is that from what we know of Batman, he is a very introspective person and he's aware of his own traumas. But in this comic, he takes it a step further by actually understanding who he is and then understanding the person he wants to be. And he takes it a step further by actually trying to bridge that gap between his current self and his future self. So his id and his superego. He's trying to collapse it. And that coincidentally reminds me of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, because as I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I was aware of the fact that Marcus is also quite keen on who he is as a person. And the main theme about Meditations is his endless pursuit to bridge the gap between who he is and the ideal person who he actually wants to be. He spends endless amounts of time characterizing these two things and trying to make them into one person, his true self, his self actualized self. And again, these are a lot of Stoic undertones. They have a lot of Stoic undertones to them within each book. So, for a brief understanding of meditation, it is a collection of private notes or private journals made by the Emperor Marcus Aurelius during his reign over Rome. And it focuses a lot on him trying to understand his duty to himself, duty to his people, duty to his state, his nation, duty to his adoptive father, duty to his family. And then also, he talks a lot about honor, what it means to be an honorable leader, what it means to be true to yourself and to honor yourself. And again, he talks about bridging that gap. Unlike Batman, Marcus Aurelius is very keen on what can and cannot be controlled. That is actually the main theme when it comes to Stoic philosophy. Understanding that while there are things you cannot control, you must always focus on what you can control. And with that, he understands that as a leader, there are people who will say things and interpret situations that are outside of his control. But to be a true leader, he must identify that and control what he can control who he is, control his responses, control his actions, his criteria of honor, his criteria of what he wants to leave behind as a legacy. And definitely that is something that Batman in Batman Ego tries to take when it comes to taking a page from Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So while that is an area in which they differ, there are actually three main areas that I believe both Marcus Aurelius and Batman merge. The first similarity between Marcus Aurelius and Batman is that both of these men are men of power and of great authority and wealth, who have chosen to remain accountable to themselves and be held accountable by themselves. And this is not because they are short of good external parties and external counsel. We know that Alfred sometimes gives his own counsel to Batman, and that Batman sometimes seeks counsel from the Bat family, etc., etc. We also know that Marcus Aurelius had a co-emperor by the name of Verus, and for the better portion of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, he forms a lot of what he knows about duty and honor and what makes a good and bad person from his mentors and also from his family members like his mother and his grandfather, etc., etc. So we do know that these two people have good external parties that they can heed to, but they choose not to because they understand that nobody can critique them the way that they critique themselves. They know that they do have to answer to a higher power, but that higher power is actually themselves. So let's take the example of Batman. In the episode, the two-part episode of Batman, the animated series with Harvey Dent, a small portion of that two-part episode was Bruce Wayne looking inward and introspecting on the fact that he was not able to catch the signs of Harvey Dent's mental decline the way he believes he should have. And we also see in the entirety of Meditations that yes, these people, his external counsels, gave him the cheat code for what it means to be a good person, but he continuously reiterates it to himself, and he is the only one that can self impose it upon himself. So, yes, these two people, of course, have great external counsels, but they both understand that they have to answer to themselves at all times. The second similarity between Marcus Aurelius and Batman is that both these men frame their duty as service over personal cost. Marcus Aurelius constantly talks about how a bee does not complain that he has to make honey, and therefore the act of doing good and the act of doing your actual duty should feel like second nature to you. It should feel like an evolution, and therefore he continuously acknowledges that his duty is to serve Rome and that it is not a reward, neither is it a prize that he has come into power. In fact, he continuously mentions the fact that he was adopted into power and it is not something that he inherited by blood itself. So that acts as a form of humbling for him to remember that he is constantly owing Rome his service. And especially because he believes that to turn down the throne, to turn down this rule that he has been given as the emperor, is, in a way, spitting at the face of his adoptive father, who believed that he is to be his primary successor. He believed in him, and therefore he believes that he owes it to Rome and to his adoptive father to carry on this mantle. And of course, we have this similar situation with Bruce Wayne. He believes that he owes it to Gotham to spend his wealth and his fortune to make the city better, because he knows that if he is to turn away from Gotham the way that he sometimes wants to, he knows that crime is not going to turn away with him, that crime is not going to automatically end because he no longer picks up the cow. Instead, he knows that it's going to be worse, and he believes he has a duty to serve Gotham. And that duty comes over the personal trauma that he faces on a daily basis as a result of continuously picking up that mantle and that cow. The third and final similarity between Marcus Aurelius and between Batman is that both these men tend to introspect in the third person. And I know with Bruce Wayne in Batman Ego, that is a lot more obvious and a lot easier because he's speaking to a hallucination of himself. But I believe the symbolism is still there nonetheless. And with Marcus Aurelius, we see that throughout meditation, he constantly addresses a you instead of an I. And that is significant because this is a publication of his journal in which he is speaking to and instructing himself. So we know that with every instructions to a you, he's speaking to himself. And we could ask ourselves why this is important and why they would do this in this way. And I believe that by addressing a second self, we create enough distance for us to argue with ourselves. And that is what Marcus Aurelius and Batman is doing. I believe that it is much easier for both Marcus Aurelius and Batman to lie to an I instead of a you, because we tend to lie to ourselves when we are confronted with ourselves.